He staggered through the midnight storm, fur matted, eyes clouded, a silent plea pressed against his battered collar. In a city where broken souls are discarded with the trash, one blind shepherd still searches for forgiveness. No one wants to give. But tonight, a weary vet finds a secret message, one so desperate it could shatter everything the town believes about loyalty, betrayal, and love. What happened? The night Valor lost his sight. And who will pay the price when old wounds finally bleed in the light? Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. And don't blink, this ending will break your heart. And rebuild it. Stay to the last second. It began with the kind of rain that only seems to fall in American cities after midnight, merciless, drenching everything with a relentless sorrow. The gutters overflowed, alleys shimmered with oily puddles, and the yellowed streetlights along the edge of Ravenbrook flickered against the darkness, as if debating whether it was worth the fight. The night should have belonged to sleep, but instead, it belonged to the forgotten. Dr. Elijah Rowan was bent over a stack of files in his cramped back office, trying to ignore the low drone of thunder that rattled the window panes. His phone rang shrill, urgent, the sound of someone on the brink. Ravenbrook Animal Rescue. He answered automatically, expecting the usual complaints. A raccoon in the attic, a cat gone missing. Instead, the voice crackled with panic. Please, you have to come. There's a dog, big shepherd. I think he's down behind Franklin Market. He's not moving. Doc, I think he's dying. Rowan didn't waste time asking questions. His mind snapped into action. He grabbed his old army green raincoat, shoved his stethoscope and trauma kit into a battered duffel, and hurried out to his van. Boots slapping the sidewalk. The streets were empty. Shops shuttered. Windows aglow with television light. Behind drawn curtains, no one out at this hour. Not in this weather. Not in this neighborhood. The drive to Franklin Market felt longer than usual. Even as Rowan raced through every red light, the wipers struggled against a wall of water, squeaking with each pass, barely holding back the deluge that blurred the world beyond the glass. The van rattled over potholes and garbage, the city's underbelly exposed and raw. He pulled up to the mouth of an alley, just as lightning stitched the sky, illuminating a lone figure huddled under a limp umbrella. Layla Quinn, still in her rescue uniform, a reflective vest, jeans, muddied at the knees, looked impossibly young in the storm's assault. But she was Ravenbrook's most stubborn volunteer, the kind who ran toward trouble because she could not bear to turn away. Her flashlight cut a narrow beam through the darkness, and Rowan caught the glint of her eyes as he jogged over. She nodded wordlessly and led him a few steps in, where the alley choked down into puddles and refused. There, half submerged in a mire of trash and runoff, lay the shepherd. His size was impressive, even collapsed, muscles wasted beneath a pelt of matted fur. Layla was already kneeling in the grime, her hands hovering above the animal's heaving side. He's alive, she said, breathless, as Rowan joined her, but barely. He's freezing, and I think he's blind. She swept the flashlight gently over the shepherd's face. The dog's eyes were clouded, pupils unresponsive to the light, but his ears twitched, as if trying to focus on the voices around him. Mud clung to his muzzle, and streaks of red, old, and new ran down his side, lost in the rain. It was clear he'd been out here for some time, fighting a losing battle against the night. Rowan's hands worked quickly, almost automatically. He murmured soft reassurances. Easy, boy, you're safe now. We've got you, as he checked the shepherd's pulse, temperature, and breathing. The animal shivered violently beneath his touch, but made no move to bite or escape. It was as if the dog had finally spent his last reserves of hope and could only surrender. Rowan pressed his palm to the shepherd's chest and felt the frantic flutter of a heart in distress. Behind them, a pair of police cruisers idled at the mouth of the alley. The officers inside watched for a moment, then turned away, returning to their phones. In Ravenbrook, a stray dog, even a dying one, was not worth getting wet for naught when there were no owners, no children crying, no cameras watching. As Rowan assessed the injuries, deep scrapes along the flanks, bruised ribs, an old bullet graze on one haunch, Layla spoke softly, almost to herself. Someone did this. He wasn't just lost. He was dumped. Look at the collar. She brushed the fur away, revealing a battered leather strap, so soaked and stained it seemed fused to the shepherd's neck. The brass buckle was worn nearly smooth, but what caught Rowan's eye was the dark, crusted patch along one side, a smear of dried blood, and beneath it, a series of tiny raised marks The shepherd, though weak, let out a single, rough bark as Layla's fingers brushed the collar. The sound was not angry, more a warning, a reminder that even now, there was some line not to be crossed. Layla recoiled, whispering, "Sorry, sorry, boy," and the dog sagged back, his head hitting the ground with a dull thump. Rowan saw then, unmistakably, a tear sliding through the dirt on the shepherd's cheek, one drop, distinct among the thousands falling from the sky. It was a sight that shook even him. A man who had seen more pain than most. He cradled the shepherd's head, murmuring again, and Layla gently laid her jacket across the animal's back, protecting him from the worst of the cold. Together, moving, with awkward urgency, they lifted the dog Rowan, supporting the hindquarters. Layla, steadying the chest, and carried him toward the van. The shepherd's body was heavy but limp, his breathing shallow. Each exhale, a wet, rattling plea. Before Rowan loaded him into the crate, he studied the collar once more. His fingers traced the tiny bumps, deliberate, carefully punched into the leather. "It's Braille," he muttered, mostly to himself. "But what does it say?" He tried to memorize the pattern, intending to ask someone who knew. A faint hope flickered in his chest. A question without an answer. Rain battered the metal roof of the van as they drove through the night, heading back toward the clinic. Layla sat in the back, stroking the shepherd's matted fur, whispering promises and apologies he could not understand. The city slipped by, anonymous and uncaring, lights blurring in the downpour. In the front seat, Rowan gripped the steering wheel, mind racing with possibilities. Who had done this? What story was locked in the body of this broken dog? And what message waited on that collar? For someone willing to see, there are wounds you'll never see, wounds you can only feel with your heart. Rowan noticed the strange, raised pattern on the collar, suspected it was Braille, but no one yet could unravel its secret meaning. The rain had not let up for a moment, its mournful drumming against the tin roof of Dr. Rowan's modest clinic, blending with the soft whirring of machines and the low, labored breaths of the injured shepherd on the examining table. It was barely dawn, but Rowan's world had long since surrendered to sleeplessness, fueled by the gnawing ache of helplessness that always crept in after nights like this. The fluorescent lights painted everything in a colorless glow. The world outside the window was all mist and trembling shadows. Valor lay motionless now, except for the shudder in his chest with each ragged inhale. Layla, still damp from the rain, sat at the edge of the table, gently cleaning blood and mud from the shepherd's fur. Every so often, her eyes wandered to the battered leather collar Rowan had laid on a tray beside him. She studied the tiny bumps etched along its underside, her brow furrowed. "Do you think it's Braille?" she asked, voice thick with fatigue, but straining toward hope. Rowan, peering through his reading glasses, turned the collar in his hands, running his thumb along the unfamiliar raised marks. "If it is, I can't read it, but I know someone who can." He excused himself briefly and made a quick call. And minutes later, the bell above the clinic's front door jingled softly, a gentle sound, somehow incongruous with the dread still thick in the air. Arthur was a familiar presence in Rowan's life and, despite the cane that tapped out his path, always arrived with a dignity that seemed to hush every room he entered. His white beard glistened with raindrops, and his heavy coat still dripped onto the welcome mat as Layla let him in. Arthur's hands were large and calloused, but his touch was as delicate as a pianist's. Rowan placed the collar in his friend's outstretched hands, watching as Arthur traced the pattern with an intimacy reserved for those who understand the language of touch better than sight. The old man's brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving silently. Then, in a low, even voice, he read aloud, "If anyone still believes in forgiveness, please bring me home." The words hung in the air, impossibly heavy. Layla pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide and shimmering with disbelief. For a moment, even the persistent hum of the rain faded into the background, drowned out by the silent question that lingered between them. What kind of suffering had etched such a plea into a dog's only possession? Valor seemed to sense the change, his head turned ever so slightly in Arthur's direction, nostrils flaring, as if he recognized something familiar or comforting. In the cadence of the old man's voice, Arthur smiled, his eyes turned toward Valor. "His listening, I can feel it." His voice softened. "You know, not so long ago, Knoin shepherds like him were heroes. Some still are, but not every story ends in parades or medals." He stroked Valor's head gently, and the shepherd's ears quivered. "There was a time, Arthur continued. When I trained guide dogs for the blind, some were canine second, retired from police work, discarded when their service ended, yet still searching for a purpose, a family, they're survivors. But sometimes, the world gives up on them too soon. Layla nodded, looking away, tears collecting along her lashes. She was thinking not just of Valor, but of every animal she'd tried, and sometimes failed to save. Why would anyone do this to him, she whispered, mostly to herself. But Arthur heard. Not all wounds are visible, Layla. Sometimes, the people who need forgiveness, most are the ones who can't ask for it themselves. That message, it's for someone with a heart strong enough to answer. Rowan turned his attention back to Valor, his mind racing through possibilities. The dog's physical wounds were severe, but treatable lacerations cleaned, fluid, administered. A slow but steady pulse, now beating beneath Rowan's palm. The emotional wounds, though, ran deeper, stitched into the shepherd's trembling limbs and haunted gaze. Rowan knew that somewhere in the dog's past, there was a story, tangled up with loss and hope, cruelty and loyalty, a message hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone willing to see past the scars. Just as Arthur was telling a story about a dog named Jasper, how he had led his blind handler through a burning building, refusing to leave his side, even when the smoke grew too thick to breathe, a siren wailed in the street, slicing through the fragile calm of the clinic. In an instant, Valor jolted upright, his head snapping toward the window, muscles tense beneath his battered skin. The transformation was stunning, a dying dog roused by a single sound, every nerve alight with memory or instinct. He let out a low, guttural growl, not of anger, but of recognition, a sentinel awoken. Layla reached for him, but Rowan motioned her back, not wanting to crowd the shepherd in this state. Valor's tail thumped weakly against the steel table. The siren faded, but its echo seemed to linger in Valor's chest, his breaths coming faster now, his ears straining for cues only he could hear. Rowan gently laid a hand on the dog's shoulder, feeling the tension there, a bundle of fear and readiness. You remember, don't you? He murmured. You still want to protect someone. Arthur smiled, knowingly. They never forget, he said. Not the ones who've loved or been loved, not the ones who have given everything. His words, simple and true, settled in the room like a benediction. Outside, the rain slackened just a bit, though the sky was still slate gray. Rowan, energized by what he had learned, turned his attention once more to the collar, squinting at a faint engraving near the braille, a sequence of numbers, faded but readable, K9, S013. He jotted it down in his notebook, heart pounding with a familiar blend of dread and resolve. Somewhere, in some dusty file or forgotten archive, lay the answer to who Valor had been, who he was meant to be, and perhaps even who had failed him. Layla cleaned Valor's ears, her movements gentle, whispering that everything would be okay. Arthur lingered by the table, his presence a quiet comfort. Valor's eyes, though blind, seemed to follow every word, every sound, as if he was determined to memorize this new warmth, to tuck it away against whatever trials might come next. For a while, the only sounds were the soft clink of medical tools, the rhythm of breath, and the drip of rain outside. Yet something had changed. The plea on the collar was no longer a silent question drifting in the dark. It had become a challenge, a promise, one Rowan found himself determined to answer. Sometimes, all it takes is a single touch to wake memories that should have been lost forever. Rowan, determined now, turned to the battered collar once more, resolving to uncover the truth behind Valor's past, starting with the faded K9 code pressed deep into the worn leather. The rain finally slowed to a cold drizzle as the first watery light of morning crept into Ravenbrook. The city, glistening and sullen, seemed to hold its breath as Dr. Rowan parked in front of the rescue data center, an aging brick building tucked between a pawnshop and an abandoned laundromat. The place was always too cold, its walls lined with flickering monitors and battered file cabinets that hummed with forgotten stories. Valor, still weak but determined, padded alongside Rowan and Layla, following the scent of antiseptic and wet paper with cautious steps. The old shepherd's nose twitched at every strange odor, ears flicking at the hum of computers, and the echo of doors slamming somewhere down the hall. Layla's voice was a whisper as she greeted the man behind the front desk, Henry Slate, a wiry figure with a thick gray mustache and a badge that looked older than the computer in front of him, barely looked up. "Back so soon?" "Layla," he muttered, eyes darting from the girl to the battered dog at her side. Rowan explained, with an edge of urgency, that they needed to access the records for a retired K9 case code SO13. Henry's expression sharpened, all signs of fatigue gone. "Not that file," he said quietly. "You're poking a hornet's nest. Doc, some stories are better left buried." Layla pressed on. Undeterred, she held up Valor's collar, fingers trembling only slightly as she pointed to the faint number stamped into the leather. Henry hesitated. Then, reluctant, but unable to refuse, buzzed them through a heavy steel door into the heart of the archive. The room was thick with the must of paper and the oily scent of toner. Rows of metal cabinets stretched toward the ceiling, their drawers labeled in a cryptic shorthand that only the oldest staff could decipher. With Henry's guidance, they found the right cabinet. Layla slipped on thin latex gloves and fed the collar into the station's antique scanner. The machine whirred and spat out a faint beep as the display flickered to life, painting the collar's code across the screen. K9SO13, Layla read aloud, then gasped softly as a profile appeared. Orion male, German Shepherd, retired, K9. The accompanying photo showed a strong, noble-looking shepherd in his prime, alert and proud, a gleam of intelligence in his eyes that even the grainy scan could not diminish. As Layla scrolled down, the case notes tumbled across the screen 5 years ago. Orion had been involved in a high-profile rescue during a warehouse fire that made headlines across the state. The next line, however, was chilling. Retired. Injuries, blindness, Ziefere trauma. Handler, unavailable. Subject of internal investigation. There was an attached news clipping: officer missing after blaze, foul play. Suspected. Rowan's jaw tightened. He knew the story, at least in fragments. A decorated police dog who vanished from the public record. A handler lost in the fire. Rumors of a botched rescue and departmental cover-up. Layla's eyes widened as she clicked another file, revealing grainy photos from the aftermath. Scorched debris, police tape flapping in the wind. Firefighters gathered in exhausted clusters. In the center of one frame was a small figure, a young girl, her face half turned from the camera, white cane visible, standing beside Orion. Next to her stood a man in uniform, face blurred by smoke and shadow. The front of his jacket, marred by an unmistakable burn mark. Henry watched over their shoulders, his lips pressed into a hard line. "That's Olivia," he said quietly, tapping the photo. "Blind since birth. The dog saved her, they say. As for the man, well, he was supposed to be the hero, too, but he disappeared the same night, and the official story keeps changing." His voice lowered, heavy with warning. "You want my advice? Let sleeping dogs lie. Everyone who tried to follow up on this got nothing but headaches, and a couple lost their jobs. Hell, one nearly lost his life." Valor stood tensely between Rowan and Layla, nostrils quivering as the printer spat out page after page. The smell of ink and warmed plastic seemed to unsettle him, and his tail dropped. As Layla lifted the stack of files, Valor whined a soft, searching sound, then retreated a few steps, hackles twitching. Rowan knelt beside him, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though he could feel the pulse racing beneath the dog's skin. It was as if the walls themselves pressed in, thick with secrets and the weight of stories that refused to die. Layla sifted through the photos, pausing on one that made her breath catch. There was Orion, unmistakably Valor, head held high despite soot-blackened fur, a bandaged paw in the hand of a little girl with a halo of tangled hair. She leaned on a white cane, her other arm thrown around the shepherd's neck in a gesture of absolute trust. Behind them, the blurred man in uniform seemed both guardian and ghost. Layla studied his uniform, noting the burn mark on his shoulder, a wound that echoed in every angle of his posture. The photo had been stamped with a red evidence label, and beneath it, a case number faded by time. Layla turned the image to Henry. "Who's the man?" she asked. Henry shook his head. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Depends on who you ask. Officially, he was Meredith Vaughn's partner. Unofficially, nobody knows what happened after the fire. Some say he died trying to save the girl. Others think he saw something he shouldn't have." The silence that followed was brittle, as if the room itself waited to see if they would press further. Rowan stared at the records, the names and dates blending with the memory of Arthur's voice. If anyone still believes in forgiveness, please bring me home. The phrase echoed in Rowan's chest, a summons he couldn't ignore. The dog at his side was not simply lost, he had been discarded. Erased, his story drowned beneath a flood of rumors and bureaucratic dust. Layla clutched the photo, her knuckles white. We have to find out what happened, she said softly. Henry closed the drawer with a clang that seemed to signal both warning and benediction. Be careful, Layla. You're dealing with shadows. Around here, old ghosts don't always stay buried. He gave Rowan a look, part concern, part resignation. If you're dead set on this, you need to talk to Meredith Vaughn. She's the last one left who knows anything. As they left the archives, Valor lingered at the threshold, nostrils flaring as if he could still smell the smoke from 5 years before. Rowan paused, letting his fingers rest on the dog's head, feeling the heat of old wounds and new questions. Layla tucked the photo into her jacket, her determination flaring brighter than the bleak morning sun. Outside, Ravenbrook seemed to watch them go, rain tapping its code against the windows, as if urging them on to a truth that would not stay silent. Old memories always leave their scorch marks somewhere on the fates of lost souls. Rowan, with Layla and Valor at his side, set out to find the only survivor of the fire, the woman whose silence might finally unearth what happened that night, Meredith Vaughn. The slow rain continued, dragging afternoon into a melancholy haze. Ravenbrook's buildings pressed close together, their brick faces weathered by years of hard luck and harder secrets, but Meredith Vaughn's apartment seemed to hold the shadows tighter than most. The hallway was dim, the flickering overhead light accentuating the worn lines in the wallpaper, the scent of coffee and faded dog fur mixing with the lingering dampness from outside. Rowan led the way, Layla trailing behind, clutching the old case file and Valor's leash with a kind of cautious reverence. Valor, for his part, moved uneasily, ears low, tail tucked, his steps growing hesitant as they reached the scuffed door, marked 2B. Rowan knocked, the sound dull against the chipped paint. It took a moment before the lock clicked. Then the door cracked open to reveal Meredith, her frame, slim and wiry, in a faded sweatshirt, her silvering hair tied back, eyes sharp but wary, as if expecting trouble. She barely glanced at Rowan or Layla. Her gaze fell immediately to the shepherd standing between them. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to hold still. Meredith's breath hitched, and her hand went to her chest, knuckles whitening as she stared at Valor's face. No, she whispered, voice barely audible. It can't be. Rowan introduced himself, explaining their reason for coming, but Meredith barely seemed to register the words. She looked at Valor again, eyes glistening with a pain that was older than any scar. Orion, she asked, but the word was a gasp, as if saying the name out loud risked calling up ghosts she was not ready to confront. Valor, uncertain, wagged his tail slowly, a weak, almost apologetic gesture, then inched backward, shrinking from her approach. The air between them grew thick, with something unspeakable hope laced with dread. Orion died, Meredith said suddenly, as if to herself, as if saying it might make it true. He died in the fire with Ethan. Layla shook her head gently, pulling the faded photograph from the case file and holding it out. He survived, Meredith. He's here, but he's hurt, and we don't know why. Meredith took the photo, fingers trembling, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line as she absorbed the image, the smoke, the little girl, the shepherd with bandaged paws, the man beside them, face obscured by darkness. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain ticked softly against the window, and somewhere in the distance, a car, horn, blared. Valor whined, shifting his weight, eyes unfocused, but searching for some familiar comfort. Meredith finally turned away, motioning them inside. Her apartment was cramped and filled with reminders of another life-framed citations on the walls, shelves of training manuals, a row of faded photographs, K9, graduations, rescue, mission, family barbecues with Ethan's tall figure always at the center, his face now cut out from most. On the mantel, a small urn sat beside a folded American flag and a well-worn leather leash. I didn't want to believe it at first, Meredith said, settling herself at the kitchen table. That fire, it took everything. My husband, my partner, my faith in the department. They told me Orion was gone. They told me to move on. But there were always questions, things that didn't add up. Files went missing. People stopped answering my calls. Her voice thickened, and for the first time, her hands trembled in full view. After Ethan died, the department changed. They shut down the investigation. They told me to destroy Orion's record. Said it was for the best, that it was all tied to an internal matter. Nobody wanted public. I did what they asked. But I kept the leash. I couldn't let go. Layla listened, her eyes wide, absorbing the sorrow and bitterness that had seeped into every corner of Meredith's life. What really happened that night? She asked softly. Meredith looked away. Her gaze distant, haunted. Ethan was onto something, she said. He believed someone in the department was taking bribes, letting evidence walk, cutting deals with the wrong people. He told me to keep Olivia safe. That if anything happened, I should get her as far away as I could. And then, the fire. I never saw him again. She fell silent, wiping at her eyes. Valor, sensing the rising tension, let out a low whimper and shuffled backwards, pressed against Rowan's legs. He seemed torn between longing for comfort and fearing what it might cost. Meredith reached out instinctively, but Valor's body tensed, his tail curling inward, and he withdrew further. The sight broke something in her, and she laughed bitterly. He remembers, even now, he remembers what they did to us. The room felt colder. The storm, outside, intensifying. Rowan studied Meredith, searching for a sign that she was holding something back. He set the collar on the table, pointing to the Braille inscription and the faded number. This was found on him, he said quietly. Do you know who put it there? Meredith shook her head, but Rowan could see uncertainty flicker in her eyes. Suddenly, from somewhere outside a block away, maybe more, the sharp wail of a fire truck's siren pierced the air, echoing down the narrow street. Valor's head snapped up, his entire body tensing. He barked once, loud and desperate, the sound raw with memory. Meredith's face crumpled as she watched him, grief and guilt mingling in the lines around her mouth. He never could stand the sirens after, she whispered. He'd flinch, every time. Sometimes I wonder if he remembers the fire, or just the fear. Layla looked between them, her voice, gentle, but insistent. Why did you destroy Orion's file, Meredith? Was it just to protect the department? Or was there something else? Meredith hesitated, her jaw working. At last, she answered, her words barely above a whisper. I was told if I didn't, Olivia would be next. That's how these things work. It's never just about the dog. It's about the secrets we all carry. There are deaths no one dares to speak of. Only the living remain haunted by them. Rowan, feeling the weight of everything left unsaid, sensed that the truth was still lurking somewhere in Meredith's fractured memories. As the wail of the siren faded into the steady drum of rain, Rowan knew this story was far from over. He could not shake the suspicion that the real answers remained hidden, especially after seeing Valor's instinctive, terrified reaction to the distant call of fire and pain. The day had barely begun to recover from the rain, yet the sky above Ravenbrook still hung heavy and gray. The sun, a mere rumor behind thick clouds. Rowan maneuvered the car down, streets scarred by time, past boarded-up storefronts and graffiti-splashed walls, until they reached the abandoned warehouse district. Years ago, this had been the heart of the city's manufacturing pride. Now, it was a graveyard of half-collapsed buildings and rusted fences, where every gust of wind carried the scent of ashes and old regret. Valor rode in the back seat, head lowered but body quivering with a restless energy neither Rowan nor Layla could understand. He'd begun whining as they drew nearer to this part of town, a low, keening sound that grew sharper at each turn. The warehouse loomed up before them, its brick facade blackened by fire, windows shattered, steel beams exposed like bones. Layla hesitated at the gate, but Valor jumped from the car as soon as it stopped, moving with unsteady urgency, his blind eyes fixed on something only he could sense. Rowan and Layla hurried after him, picking their way through debris and puddles, past weeds that burst through concrete cracks. The air inside the ruin was colder, thick with the musk of char and rot. In the dim light filtering through holes in the roof, Valor paused, nostrils flaring, then padded toward a corner near what remained of the loading dock. He sniffed the ground with a determination that made Rowan's heart ache. With a sudden, desperate energy, Valor began to dig first with his paws. Then, nosing aside, chunks of concrete and burned wood, ignoring the pain that surely shot through his injured body. Rowan knelt to help, feeling the gritty, oily earth wedge beneath his nails. Layla joined them, hands shaking as she cleared debris away. It didn't take long before the dog's paws struck something metallic, a small rusted tin, half melted at one edge, buried deep beneath layers of ash and broken glass. Rowan pried it loose and opened it with care, finding inside 2 artifacts a piece of cloth, its edges scorched and blackened, but the pale pink still visible in patches, and a battered police badge, its numbers and name worn nearly smooth by fire and time. Before anyone could speak, a voice echoed from the dark. "I see you found it." Mason Dre, Ravenbrook's oldest firefighter, stood in the doorway, his yellow slicker stained with old soot, hair grayer and thinner than in the newspaper clippings Rowan remembered. Mason's eyes narrowed as he looked at Valor, recognition warring with surprise. "He brought you back here. After all these years." Layla held up the scorched cloth. It's a handkerchief, isn't it? There's a name embroidered on the edge." "Olivia." Mason nodded, lips pressed tight. "That's right, Olivia Grant. She was just a little girl back then, blind, but braver than half the men on my crew. That night, the whole place was an inferno. We thought nobody made it out. But this dog," he glanced at Valor, voice thickening. He led her through the smoke, even after the flames took his sight, saved her life, and almost lost his own. As Mason spoke, Valor stilled, pressing his muzzle to the edge of the handkerchief, as if confirming its scent. The memories flooding his battered senses, Rowan watched the shepherd's body shiver, not from cold, but from a torrent of emotions that no words could express. Layla crouched beside Valor, her hand on his neck, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "How did he know where to go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason shook his head. "That's the thing about dogs like him. They don't see the world the way we do. They remember through scent, through sound. When everything's dark and the smoke's too thick, they still find a way. That night, we'd lost track of time. Sirens screaming, people yelling. The building was collapsing. I heard barking loud, insistent. When we found them, he was shielding Olivia with his body, nudging her forward, refusing to leave her behind." Valor, as if hearing Mason's words, let out a soft bark and lay down on the cold concrete. He remained there, unmoving, for a long moment, head bowed, tail limp, the picture of exhausted devotion. Rowan glanced at the badge, holding it up to the weak light. The badge. Whose was it, he asked. Mason's eyes hardened. "Ethan Vaughn, the chief. He disappeared that night. Some say he died in the fire. Others think he just vanished. There were rumors, payoffs, cover-ups. The truth got lost with the smoke." Layla shivered, feeling the weight of secrets left to rot in the dark. Valor's breathing quickened, a restless panting that set his entire body trembling. The dog pressed closer to Rowan, as if seeking comfort or protection. Layla watched, her throat tight with emotion. He still remembers. Even after all this time, he can't let go. They stayed in the ruined warehouse for a while, listening to Mason recount how, after that night, the department changed. Files went missing, and people stopped asking questions. The girl, Olivia, was whisked away, her story buried along with the rubble. "The only thing that made it out," Mason said softly, "was this dog. But nobody wanted him. He was blind, broken, a hero, forgotten by the people who should have protected him." Valor barked again, softer now, as if in agreement. He rose slowly and moved to a mound of ashes in the far corner. There, he stopped, stood utterly still, and then lay down, nose pressed to the soot, as though searching for something lost. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the drip of water through the cracked ceiling and the distant rumble of traffic. Rowan knelt beside the shepherd, stroking the rough fur. "You brought us back for a reason, didn't you?" he murmured. Valor's ear flicked, but he did not move, lost in the echo of memories. Layla pressed the handkerchief into Rowan's hand. "We have to find her. Olivia Grant. She's the key to all of this." The shadows of the warehouse stretched long, the air thick with the residue of fire and betrayal. As they turned to leave, Valor lingered one last time at the mound of ash, his body rigid, the past clutching at him as tightly as the pain in his chest. The darkness of memory still carries the scent of smoke and pain that has never truly faded. Layla, feeling the urgency of a story unfinished, resolved, then and there, to track down the girl whose life Valor had once saved, a decision that would lead them all deeper into the labyrinth of secrets. Ravenbrook had tried so long to forget. The sun had slipped low, smearing gold and lavender across the sky, as Rowan's car pulled quietly into the parking lot of the Ravenbrook Center for the Blind. Evening wrapped the center in a hush, the kind found only in places where daily struggles have become routine, where hope, exhaustion, and resolve live, side by side. Rowan, Layla, and Valor made their way up the ramp. The shepherd's pause, padding gently over the textured concrete, his steps steady, despite his blindness. There was a serenity to the center, a softness in the voices that filtered through the hallways, and the faint scent of lavender drifting from the gardens. But beneath that calm, an unspoken tension waited, one that pulsed in Valor's rapid heartbeat and Layla's worried glance at her phone. Miss Green, the center's manager, greeted them at the door, with the guarded warmth of someone accustomed to difficult news. Her hair was shot through with silver, and her eyes lingered a little longer than usual on Valor, as though reading stories in his scars. Olivia's in the music room, she said quietly, leading them past braille signs and tactile art along the walls. She hasn't had visitors in some time. Please, be gentle. Layla nodded, her fingers tightening on the leash, as Valor pressed closer to her side. They found Olivia at a piano, in a sunlit alcove, her slender fingers moving soundlessly across the keys, eyes closed to the world. She was older now, a woman, not the frightened girl from the grainy photos, tall, with a curtain of dark hair and a quiet poise that suggested she had built her life around silence. At the sound of footsteps, Olivia's hands fell away from the keys. She turned her face toward them, her features alert, beautiful, but drawn with tension. Olivia Grant Rowan asked softly, stepping forward. Olivia nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes. Layla introduced herself, and Rowan, hesitating as she added, we brought someone who's been looking for you. Before she could say more, Valor moved to the center of the room, nose high, tail wagging in slow, uncertain arcs. He moved closer, drawn by a scent that lived somewhere beyond memory, a map of home, fear, and love intertwined. Olivia's posture stiffened as Valor approached, his head tilted, ears twitching, every fiber of his body focused on her, as if time itself held its breath. Then, in a gesture as gentle as a sigh, he nudged his muzzle against her knee. The room stilled. Olivia's lips parted in a silent gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth. For a heartbeat, it seemed she might reach out, bury her face in his fur, and let the years melt away. Instead, a sob escaped her, sharp and childlike. No, I can't. Her voice trembled, her body shaking with grief. She could no longer hide. She pushed her chair back and stumbled to her feet, tears streaming down her cheeks as she turned away. Please, take him away. I can't. She pressed herself against the wall, arms crossed, as if holding herself together, her breath ragged. Layla, heartbreaking, tried to comfort her. It remembers you, Olivia. He never forgot, but Olivia shook her head, refusing to turn around. I don't want to remember. Every time I close my eyes, I see the flames. I hear my father's voice and the sirens, and then, nothing but darkness. Her words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. Rowan stepped back, giving her space, understanding that wounds of this kind needed time more than sympathy. Valor stood in the center of the room, uncertain, ears drooping, yet even now, loyalty and love seemed to animate him. He moved quietly to Olivia's side, in a motion born of old habit, gently laid his head atop her foot, offering the only comfort he knew, his presence, warm and steady as a heartbeat. Olivia flinched, but did not move away. Her sobs softened. For a while, the room was silent, filled only with the sound of her uneven breathing and the faint, comforting huff of Valor's breath. Layla knelt beside the shepherd, stroking his neck, murmuring encouragement, while Olivia wept. Layla's gaze fell to the pendant at Olivia's throat, a slender, silver collar, the kind given to loved guide dogs, its surface etched with delicate braille. She gently asked, "May I see your necklace?" Olivia, after a pause, nodded, fingers trembling as she unclasped it and handed it over. Layla traced the raised dots, her heart leaping as she recognized the message, the same words engraved on Valor's collar. If anyone still believes in forgiveness, please, bring me home. A tear rolled down Layla's cheek. You gave him the message, didn't you? She whispered. Olivia nodded, voice barely audible. He saved me, and I tried to save him, but I couldn't. After the fire, they said he was dead. I wrote that hoping someone would find him, that he'd come home. Her face crumpled, guilt and longing mingling in every word, but I was too scared to look. I let them tell me he was gone, because it hurt less than hoping. Miss Green watched from the doorway, Compassion etched into every line of her face. We all carry wounds, Olivia. Sometimes it takes a friend, 2-legged or 4, to remind us we're not alone. Rowan nodded, understanding that there was no mending some scars, but that a first step had been made. The daylight was fading, and the center filled with the hush of night. Valor remained at Olivia's feet, unmoving, except for the gentle thump of his tail. The two were bound together by more than memory, by pain, survival, and a need for forgiveness. Neither had been able to claim. There are some wounds only souls who have suffered together can hope to heal. That night, as Layla and Rowan prepared to leave, Valor lingered in the hallway, ears perked, nose twitching. Something unsettled him, a scent, faint but unfamiliar, drifting in through a cracked window. He prowled the halls, low to the ground, every sense alert. The guard dog inside him, awakened by the memory of old threats. Rowan watched him, unease prickling at the back of his neck. Whatever had haunted the past was not done with them yet, and Valor was determined to stand between his people and the darkness, whatever form it might take. The halls of the Ravenbrook Center for the Blind were shrouded in a peace that belonged only to the deep hours of night. Most of the residents were long asleep, the soft hush, broken only by the faint hum of heating vents and the distant patter of rain against the glass. Somewhere, a clock ticked, counting down the quiet seconds. Layla dozed in a chair near Olivia's door, a book folded on her lap, while Rowan worked quietly on paperwork at the end of the hall. Olivia herself had drifted into a fragile sleep after hours of trembling tears. Valor stretched faithfully across the doorway, an unspoken sentinel between her and any approaching darkness. But on this night, something moved in the silence. It began with a subtle shift, the almost imperceptible creak of a back window sliding open. Valor's head lifted at once, ears flicking forward, every muscle alert. He sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, and caught a scent he knew too well, sharp, acrid, and threaded with stale tobacco and something coppery beneath. Instinct overruled fatigue. The old shepherd rose to his feet, silent as a shadow, paws gliding over the linoleum as he crept down the hallway. For a dog robbed of sight, Valor seemed to move with uncanny certainty, guided by memory and scent, a protector honed by years of loss. In the half-light, a figure drifted along the corridor, careful and hunched. The man moved with a thief's caution, gloved hands feeling along the wall until he reached the file room at the end of the hall. He was tall, lean, his face hidden beneath a battered hood. The stink of cigarettes clung to his jacket, each movement betraying nerves. He slipped inside, flashlight flicking across rows of locked drawers. As he began rifling through folders, the air behind him changed. Valor was there, invisible in the darkness, breath low, body tense. Suddenly, the shepherd sprang, teeth bared. In a silent snarl, he crashed into the intruder's legs, bowling him to the floor. A scuffle erupted, the sounds muffled but urgent, panting, the scrape of shoes, a curse under the intruder's breath. Startled, the man lashed out, boot connecting with Valor's side, but the dog held firm, jaws locked on the cuff of the man's jeans. In desperation, the stranger kicked again, wrenching free just long enough to bolt for the window. Something small and metallic clattered to the floor in the struggle, a ring gleaming dully in the moonlight, before the intruder tumbled through the opening and vanished into the night, shoes slapping against wet pavement. The commotion roused Layla first. She woke with a start, hearing Valor's bark louder, sharper than any alarm. Rowan ran up moments later, his heart pounding as he found the dog pacing by the open window, tail high, fur bristling. "What happened?" Layla gasped, rushing over. Rowan scanned the floor and spotted the ring. Stooping to pick it up, he turned it in his palm, studying the worn engraving. "It's a police ring," he murmured. "Looks old." In the faint glow of his phone, the inscription became clear. E. Vaughn. Olivia, startled awake by the noise, appeared at her doorway, confusion clouding her face. "What's happening?" Rowan hesitated, then gently pressed the ring into her hand. Her fingers traced the name, and she froze. "That's my father's," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He never took it off. He's gone." Layla knelt beside her, arms around her shoulders as Olivia's strength broke, tears spilling anew. Valor limped to her side, muzzle pressed gently to her knee, eyes sightless, but face filled with concern. He sniffed at the ring, recoiling slightly, as if the scent disturbed something deep and unsettled within him. There was blood on the metal fresh, bright in the artificial light, a smear left by the intruder's wounded hand. Rowan felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. He left in a hurry, he said. He was looking for something, maybe trying to erase the past. Why come here? Now. Layla shook her head. Whoever it was, Valor recognized the scent, and he wasn't just any burglar. He knew where to look. Olivia clutched the ring, knuckles white, lips pressed tight. If that's my father's, does that mean he's alive? The possibility seemed to shake her even more than the grief. Valor pasht. Hackles raised, a low growl in his throat. He moved restlessly from window to door, every sense alert to the strange scent that still lingered in the hallway. Layla watched him, unease prickling in her chest. He smells blood, she said quietly. Whoever was here, they're hurt, and Valor knows them. He's never reacted like this before. Rowan nodded, feeling the weight of unfinished business settling over them. They searched the file room, finding several drawers left open, papers scattered. Layla picked up a folder, the edges crumpled, and found a list of names past patients, volunteers, a few familiar to Olivia. Rowan's eyes narrowed. He was after something specific, but left before he could find it. This isn't over. The center's security system had recorded nothing. No working cameras in the old building. No guards awake at that hour. Outside, the rain returned, harder now, drumming on the roof, as if marking time. The staff was roused. Miss Green moving among the shaken residents, offering calm words and reassurances. But Rowan, Layla, and Olivia stayed together, haunted by the knowledge that the world had just shifted. Valor's presence, once a comfort, now felt like a warning. The old shepherd wouldn't sleep, pacing the hall for hours, his senses alive with dread and memory. Some ghosts never rest, especially when night brings the darkness back to life. Rowan and Layla, shaken but determined, knew there was only one way forward. They would have to confront Meredith again, to drag old secrets into the light, and demand answers about a past that refused to die. The morning in Ravenbrook was gray and restless, clouds pressing down on City Hall as if daring anyone to speak the truth. Inside, the energy felt brittle. Every conversation in the marble hallways was quick and cautious. Layla walked beside Rowan and Valor, whose presence attracted curious and nervous glances from clerks and officials. They made their way to a far corridor, to an office where the past seemed to hang heavier than the city's portraits on the wall. Meredith Vaughn sat at her cluttered desk, shoulders tense, a half-drunk cup of coffee cooling by her hand. The lines on her face looked deeper in the harsh fluorescent light. When Rowan placed the police ring on her desk, Meredith stared for a moment, and then picked it up as if afraid it might vanish. She turned it over, breath catching, as she read the engraved name inside. "Where did you find this?" Her voice was thin, nearly breaking. Rowan described the break-in at the center, how Valor had chased the intruder through the dark, and how Olivia had recognized the ring. Meredith listened, her eyes wide and stunned, then pressed the ring to her heart. "I always wanted to believe there was a chance," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "If Ethan's ring is still out there, maybe." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "They told me he died in the fire, that there was nothing to find, nothing to bury. They made me accept it because it was easier for everyone if we believed it was over." Her hand curled tight around the ring, grief and confusion mixing in her features. Before anyone could respond, the office door swung open with an impatient knock. Mayor Kelvin Dorsey stepped inside, all business and steel, eyes sharp behind his glasses. His suit was immaculate, his every movement calculated. He let the silence build for a moment, surveying Rowan, Layla, Meredith, and Valor with the cold scrutiny of a man used to control. "I see we have visitors," he said flatly. "I hope we're not wasting city time on wild stories." Rowan didn't flinch. "Mayor Dorsey, there are questions that need answers. This ring belonged to Ethan Vaughn. Last night, someone broke into the center and left it behind." "Why is someone trying so hard to erase his story?" Dorsey's mouth tightened. "With all due respect, Dr. Rowan, Ethan Vaughn's case was closed. The fire was a tragedy, and this city moved on. Digging up old scandals helps no one." Meredith stood, the pain in her eyes hardening into resolve. "You told me to destroy the K9 files. Kelvin, you wanted all records of Orion, of Valor, gone, because you knew Ethan was getting too close to something rotten inside this city. Why are you still so afraid?" Her accusation hung in the air, sharp and brave. Dorsey glanced at the dog, as if even Valor's presence offended him. "You don't know what you're talking about, Meredith." You lost a husband, and that's a tragedy. But do not confuse grief with conspiracy. These rumors threaten everyone. I won't allow this office or this city to become the next headline scandal because of old ghosts and broken dogs." His voice dropped. "Walk away." "I'm not going to say it again." Layla stepped forward, refusing to be intimidated. "What are you hiding, Mr. Mayor? Why are you so scared of what Ethan found?" Dorsey shot her a cold look. "Watch yourself, Miss Quinn. Not everyone who asks questions likes the answers they get." His threat was clear. The danger, suddenly, very real in the silence that followed. Meredith's hands shook as she wiped her eyes, but her words rang clear. Ethan uncovered a network inside the department, selling retired canine second dogs who had already given everything to the highest bidder. He wanted to expose them. That's why he died, isn't it? Dorsey's eyes narrowed, but he didn't answer. Rowan could feel Valor tense beside him, as if the dog recognized the shift in the air. He put a hand on the shepherd's back, grounding both of them. "We're not walking away," Rowan said, voice steady. "Not until the truth is out." The mayor offered a last cold smile and left the office, slamming the door behind him. As Meredith slumped back into her chair, Layla lingered near the hallway. She could just make out Dorsey's low voice as he spoke to someone on his phone. Handle those ghosts from the past. Now, Layla's blood ran cold. She knew they had gone too far to turn back, and the danger was suddenly closer than ever. Some secrets, if brought to light, could tear a city apart or set its soul free. As Layla slipped back into the office, she understood how high the stakes had become, and that from this moment, there was no way out, but through. The cafe was almost empty, its chipped linoleum floor shining beneath the lazy sweep of ceiling fans. The morning sun, spilling gold across battered booths and faded plastic menus. On the edge of the city, this was the kind of place where secrets could hide in plain sight, where truckers nursed coffee and retirees read the paper, ignoring anyone who looked like trouble. Today, Layla sat at a corner table, hood drawn low, her hands wrapped tight around a mug of tea she'd let go cold. Her eyes never left the back room, where the mayor and his assistant were supposed to meet. Valor waited in her car just outside, ready, she hoped, for anything. She'd followed Dorsey here on a hunch, after hearing his threat in the city hall, her heart still hammered from that memory, from the look in the mayor's eyes that said nothing, except that he meant every word. When Dorsey finally arrived, he didn't come alone. Nora Kimball, his longtime assistant, hurried at his side, face tense and pale. They took a booth in the back, out of earshot for most patrons. But Layla was ready. With her phone recording, she slipped out of her chair and glided past the counter, pretending to study the day's specials. As she passed, she slid a tiny audio recorder under the edge of their table, her hands shaking with nerves. She drifted to the restroom, then looped around through the kitchen, quietly taking a seat in the booth behind theirs. With a steadying breath, she pressed an earbud in, listening to the live feed. Dorsey's voice was a low growl. "You will make sure those K9 files are gone. I don't care how. If anyone finds out what we did with those dogs, this city burns. I am not losing my legacy because of a few broken animals and a dead cop. Do you understand?" Nora's response was hesitant, voice trembling, but the news is asking questions. Rowan has copies. Layla Quinn is everywhere. Dorsey cut her off. Then fix it. Lie. To threaten. Destroy. We have too much at stake for you to get soft now. And if you say one word, I'll make sure you're the one they bury. Understand? The threat hung in the air. Ugly and cold. Layla's pulse raced. The confirmation she needed was right there. Proof the mayor was orchestrating a cover-up that stretched to the heart of the city government. She could hear the fear in Nora's voice, the barely contained panic, but then a movement caught her eye, a waitress glancing her way, maybe noticing Layla's lingering too long. Suddenly, Dorsey's gaze swept the room. Layla ducked her head, but it was too late. Nora had turned, meeting Layla's eyes over the cracked vinyl seat, suspicion darkening her face. In a blur, Nora rose, heading for the restroom. Layla tried to leave, but Dorsey blocked the main aisle, his wide frame all but trapping her. "Looking for something, Miss Quinn?" he asked, softly, menace in his tone. Nora, now behind her, grabbed for Layla's wrist, nails digging deep. "You've been listening. You think you're brave," Nora hissed. Layla twisted away, but Nora lunged, catching her arm and trying to wrestle the phone from her grip. Dorsey closed in, voice low and furious. "Hand it over. Now." The struggle grew chaotic. Share, scraping, a few customers, craning their necks, as if considering whether to intervene or mind their own business. But Valor had already sensed trouble. In the parking lot, he had grown agitated at the sound of his human's muffled shouts. Before anyone could react, the shepherd crashed through the front door, teeth bared. Moving with a speed and focus that stunned the room, he launched himself at Nora, his jaws closing around her forearm with a warning growl. She shrieked, letting go of Layla's arm, and Dorsey stepped back, startled enough to stumble. The commotion drew the cafe manager, who rushed over shouting, but Layla seized the moment. Snatching the audio recorder from under the booth, her heart pounded as she ducked Valor's head under her arm and bolted for the door. Outside, she didn't pause until they were half a block away, her hands shaking as she checked her phone. Everything had recorded perfectly. She pressed her palm to Valor's broad head, grateful beyond words for his timing and courage. "You saved me," she whispered, voice raw. Valor wagged his tail, licking the blood off her scratched wrist. Only then did Layla notice her own injuries. A split lip, bruises blooming along her forearm, but the audio file in her hand felt like armor. Back at Rowan's office, they listened to the recording in tense silence. The evidence was undeniable. The mayor and his inner circle not only knew about the K9 trafficking ring, they had orchestrated the destruction of the evidence and threatened anyone who stood in their way. Layla's voice shook as she recounted what happened, but Rowan's face grew hard. "It's time the world hears the truth," he said. They packaged the recording, along with copies of the most damning files, into an encrypted email. Rowan addressed it to Ethan Cross, an investigative reporter known for chasing the ugliest stories in Ravenbrook and never backing down. As the files were uploaded, Layla's hand hovered over the mouse. Nervous, yangling. With one click, their secrets were no longer only theirs. "No more Lees," she murmured, watching the progress bar crawl to completion. "The truth can be hidden, but it always leaves blood on the hands of the guilty." With the evidence now in motion, Rowan and Layla felt both hope and dread, knowing this would bring attention, but also paint targets on their backs. As the message left their outbox, Rowan checked the locks on the doors and windows. Valor lay curled by Layla's feet, eyes sharp in the growing dusk. This fight was far from over. The next move belonged to those willing to bring the darkness into the light. The newsroom was a hurricane of movement, monitors flickering, voices clashing, phones ringing off the hook, and the smell of burnt coffee mingling with adrenaline. The independent station, normally quiet in the late evening, had erupted into chaos. Rowan and Layla stood shoulder to shoulder with Ethan Cross, the investigative reporter whose relentless pursuit of truth had both earned him enemies and carved his name into Ravenbrook's collective conscience. Valor waited quietly at Layla's feet, ears flicking with every anxious step she took. On the glass wall, overlooking the city, the sky roiled with heavy storm clouds, as if the weather itself sensed the coming upheaval. Ethan hunched over his desk, reviewing the audio files and documents that would soon turn the city upside down. "Once we air this," he muttered, half to himself and half to Rowan, "they can't unhear it. No more hiding in the dark. I'm going live." His jaw was set, and his eyes flashed with a mix of excitement and dread. Layla double-checked the segment, hands trembling with anticipation. Rowan watched her, worry creasing his face. Valor shifted, restless, picking up on the tension in the room. The control room was packed, every available staffer prepping for what would be the most dangerous broadcast in the station's history. As the countdown to air began, Layla noticed two unfamiliar figures in black jackets, lingering near the fire exit. Her stomach knotted with unease. Before she could warn anyone, the room's power flickered. The monitors went black. Panic swept through the team. In the confusion, 3 more men pushed through the studio entrance. Hard faces, tattuet knuckles, eyes cold with violence. The sound of a weapon being cocked froze everyone in place. Ethan stepped forward, shielding the hard drive with his body. "Who are you?" he demanded. But the answer came in the form of a fist. He was dragged from his chair, a gun pressed to his side. "Where's the dog?" one of the men barked. "Where's Valor?" Layla grabbed Valor's collar, holding him close. "Let him go. He's just a dog," the leader sneered. "That dog is worth more than all of you combined. Give him to us, or your friend dies on air." Rowan lunged to intervene, but was struck down. The butt of a gun slamming into his head, he slumped to the floor, vision spinning. Layla's scream cut through the mayhem as the gang members tore Valor away, shoving her to the ground. She clung to the shepherd's fur, sobbing, but they pried her fingers loose. Through the blur of tears, she saw Valor's body trembling, not just from pain, but from the instinctive terror of recognizing his old tormentors by their scent. Even Blinel. Valor knew those men, but just as they tried to drag him toward the exit, Valor twisted free for a heartbeat and threw himself between the gunman and Layla, baring his teeth with a guttural snarl. The gunman kicked him, but Valor refused to let go, clinging to Layla's side until another blow forced him down. The newsroom erupted, shouting, security guards trying to intervene, the camera feed cutting in and out. The broadcast signal flickered and died. Ethan was hauled away, the gun pressed to his head as the attackers made their demands clear. You want your reporter back? Bring us the dog. You have 1 hour. Rowan tried to rise, blood running down his face, but was shoved back by the gang's enforcer. Layla was left, kneeling in broken glass, her cries lost in the chaos. Valor, battered and cornered, locked eyes with her, an unspoken promise, a plea not to give up hope. The shepherd's gaze never wavered, even as he was dragged, snarling and whimpering, out of the studio and into the rain-soaked night. Layla's vision blurred as Valor vanished through the doors, his head whipping back one last time. The look in his sightless eyes was unforgettable fear, love, and the last desperate message of loyalty. Tears streaked Layla's cheeks as she struggled to her feet. Security scrambled to restore order, but the room felt hollow, broken. Rovan, groggy and bleeding, forced himself up, gathering Layla in his arms. They both knew what had been lost and what was now at stake. Sometimes, loyalty is the only thing that keeps a soul from collapsing in the darkness. With Ethan held hostage, the evidence destroyed, and Valor stolen by the very men who had ruined his life, Rowan and Layla realized they were alone against an enemy, willing to burn the city to ash to hide the truth. In the hours that followed, as the storm battered the windows and sirens howled in the distance, one truth became clear to save Valor and Ethan. They would have to put their trust in an unexpected ally, someone as desperate for justice as they were, even if it meant risking everything they had left. The night was heavy with fog and danger, as Rowan and Layla followed Nora Kimball's battered sedan down an unlit back road, weaving between puddles and forgotten memories on the city's edge. The abandoned auto garage loomed ahead, once a hub of honest work, now nothing but rusted tools and shadows, crawling across cracked cement. Every window was boarded, a single yellow bulb flickering by the loading dock, the only sign of life in a sea of darkness. Layla gripped the seat until her knuckles whitened, her thoughts spinning with dread for Valor. Rowan's face was set with the kind of resolve that comes only from desperation. They parked behind a row of derelict trucks, headlights off, hearts pounding. Nora climbed out, hugging herself against the cold, her eyes darting nervously to the shadows. Once the mayor's loyal assistant, she was now little more than a fugitive caught between those she'd betrayed and the ruthless men who expected her silence. Rowan wasted no time, pinning her with a stare. You want out of this alive. Nora, you help us get Valor back and blow this thing wide open. Otherwise, you're just another loose end. Nora swallowed hard, but nodded, her face pale. Inside, the garage buzzed with low, angry voices and the distant thump of machinery. Through a crack in the office door, they could see Marco Vance, the man whose reputation for cruelty and cunning had made him a legend in Ravenbrook's underworld. He stood over a battered metal cage, gesturing furiously at two thugs beside him. That shepherd is smarter than half my crew. Marco spat. Too smart. To loyal. And he's already cost me more than he's worth. Take him out back. Finish it before he gets another chance to make trouble. The words sent a cold shiver down Layla's spine. From her hiding place behind a stack of tires, Layla could just see Valor in the cage ears, pinned back, nose pressed to the bars, his body rigid with tension. The dog's blindness hadn't dulled his senses. His head snapped up at every movement, every unfamiliar sound. Nora, watching with a mix of horror and guilt, clenched her fists. For a moment, doubt flickered in her eyes. But Layla whispered, "You know this is wrong. He's just a dog, and all he ever did was save people. Please, Nora." Something in Layla's voice broke the dam inside the woman. With a deep, shaking breath, Nora whispered, "I'll get the keys." As Nora slipped away, Rowan and Layla pressed deeper into the shadows. listening as Marco's ranting continued. Meredith arrived, just in time. Her face, a mixture of old fear and fresh resolve. She stared Marco down, her voice shaking, but clear. You broke many dogs, Marco. But you didn't take Valor's sight. The fire did that. The night he risked everything to save Olivia and her father. You only made his suffering worse. You left him to rot. You treated him like he was nothing, after he could no longer serve you. But it was the flames that stole his light, not you. Layla felt her own rage rising. Marco, eyes narrowed, growled. This city belongs to men who can do what's necessary. That mutt should have died with his handler. I'll make sure he doesn't walk away this time. The drama inside the garage grew thick. Every word, a spark, ready to set off violence. But in the shadows, Nora reappeared, a ring of keys trembling in her hand. She crept to Layla and whispered, I can get you to the cages, but you have to move fast. After this, I'm done with Dorsey. I'm done lying. Layla squeezed her arm, gratitude and fear mingling in her eyes. You're doing the right thing. They crept to the back, Rowan keeping watch, as Nora led Layla through a maze of old parts and shattered windows. Valor heard them before they arrived, his ears perking, a faint whine rising from his throat. Layla pressed her face to the bars. We're here. Boy, we're getting you out. Nora fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking as she unlocked the cage. Valor, sensing freedom, pushed against the door, nearly bowling Layla over as he pressed his nose to her cheek, tail wagging weakly. But there was no time for relief. Meredith rejoined them, face set, with grim determination. We don't have long. Marco's planning a prisoner exchange Ethan Cross for Valor, but he has no intention of keeping his word. If we want to save them both, we'll have to act first. Rowan nodded, formulating a plan, even as fear clawed at his gut. He knew too well the risk they were all taking. But Valor's life, and the lives of everyone caught in this web, depended on it. The enemy of my enemy is not always my friend, but sometimes it's the last hope left. With Valor finally at their side, battered but unbroken, Rowan, Layla, Meredith, and even Nora prepared for one final desperate gambit. The countdown had begun. The hostage exchange was hours away, and with it, their only chance to bring the truth into the light and save the ones they loved most. Rain hammered the Ravenbrook overpass, turning blacktop into rivers and streetlights into blurred halos. Sirens wailed somewhere far off. But here at the city's broken edge, only the storm and the hush of danger remained. Underneath the high girders, headlights flashed as two battered cars met in the downpour. Every shadow moved with suspicion. Every step echoed with the fear that this night might not end well for any of them. Rowan gripped the wheel, heart pounding as Layla, Meredith, and Valor huddled in the back seat. Nora waited by the door, her nerves shot. Across the bridge, Marco Vance and his men emerged from the gloom, their faces slick with rain and menace. Ethan Cross stood between them, wrists bound, bruised but alive, his eyes searching desperately for hope. The city lights flickered on the wet pavement, reflecting a world turned upside down. The exchange was supposed to be simple, one life for another, but nothing in Ravenbrook had ever been simple. Marco shouted over the wind, voice thick with threat. Bring me the dog, and your reporter goes home. Try anything, and they both die. His gun gleamed under the streetlight, aimed without mercy at Ethan's head. Valor pressed against Layla's leg, his body trembling, but his spirit unbroken. Eunpling. He sensed the trap, the way every movement was watched. As Rowan and Layla stepped forward, Meredith hung back, eyes never leaving Marco. They moved cautiously, rain soaking them to the bone. Layla's hands clenched around Valor's collar. As the two groups met at the center of the bridge, Marco's smile twisted. He shoved Ethan forward, gun pressed hard to his back. Layla, fighting terror, pushed Valor ahead. The shepherd froze, nostrils flaring. Suddenly, Valor's body stiffened, a primal memory rising from the deepest part of his mind. The scent of the man before him cut through the storm, and fear Marco, the monster, with the iron whip, the source of his nightmares. Valor's lips curled in a snarl, his hackles rising. Marco's eyes flashed with recognition and delight. That's right, Mutt. You remember me? Without warning, Marco raised his gun, the world slowing as Layla lunged to shield Valor. Wait, take me instead, she cried, placing herself between Valor and the barrel. Marco shoved her to the ground, gun pressed to her forehead. Move again, and you're dead, he spat. The moment stretched, a heartbeat frozen in terror. Then Meredith, hiding in the shadows, hurled a wrench at the men flanking Ethan. One fell. Startled, Ethan broke free, tumbling into Rowan's arms. As chaos erupted, Marco fired. The gunshot cracked the night. Valor flung himself between Layla and the bullet, the impact knocking him off his feet. Pain exploded in the air, but the shepherd refused to go down. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed Layla's jacket in his jaws, dragging her behind a concrete pillar as more shots rang out. Rain pounded the bridge as Valor's blood smeared across the pavement. But he held his ground, even as his body shook. Layla sobbed, hands pressed to his wound, whispering, "Hold on, boy, please." Rowan and Ethan returned fire with a stolen weapon, buying them precious seconds. Meredith barreled into Marco, tackling him hard enough to knock the gun away. For a brief, wild moment, the exchange became a scramble of bodies, curses, thunder, and fear. Somehow, the group managed to drag Valor to the car. Layla never let go of him. Sobs, lost in the roar of the storm. Meredith, battered but alive, helped Ethan into the back. Nora slammed the door as Rowan floored the accelerator, tires shrieking as they sped into the night, leaving Marco screaming vengeance in the rain. In the rearview mirror, Rowan caught a last glimpse of Marco's silhouette, gun raised, mouth twisted in fury. "Run, Layla," shouted. "He's coming after us." Rowan didn't look back, hands slick on the wheel, mind racing with panic and hope. Valor's breathing was shallow, each rise of his chest a miracle. He lay across Layla's lap, eyes glazed but locked on her face, trust and love undimmed even by pain. As the city flashed past, the group barely dared to breathe. Valor's wound bled freely, staining the seats, but he didn't cry out. Instead, his gaze never left Layla, an anchor in the storm. "You saved me, boy," she whispered, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "You're my hero." Meredith pressed bandages to the shepherd's wound, and Ethan fumbled for his phone to call ahead to the clinic. Nora watched out the window, fear and regret etched deep in her features. If even a single breath remains, loyalty can outlast any bullet. Their escape was narrow, their wounds deep, but for the first time in weeks, hope was more than a memory. Behind them, Marco's vow for revenge echoed across the bridge, promising the battle was far from over. Rowan sped toward the clinic, determination fierce. Their only hope was to save Valor before the city's darkness claimed them all. Dawn bled slowly into the city as if it, too. They were unsure about the day ahead. In the veterinary emergency room, the lights were already unforgivingly bright, casting hard edges on stainless steel, blue drapes, and the slender rise and fall of a chest fighting to keep time. The air smelled of chlorhexidine and warm fluids, of metal and rain-soaked fur. Valor lay on the table, shaved skin gleaming beneath salina, a pressure bandage darkening at the shoulder, where the bullet had torn through muscle and grazed bone. The monitors mapped his struggle in numbers and sound beeps too far apart, waves too shallow, an oxygen line whispering a plea. Rowan moved with focused economy, a quiet center inside the storm. "Let's keep the fluids warm and slow. He's hypothermic," he said to the night shift nurse, who steadied the line with practiced hands. "Ketamine microdose to blunt pain. Lidocaine for arrhythmias. Clamp here." His gloves shone red under the light. Meredith stood opposite him, supporting the limb while he debrided tissue, her jaw set in a line that said she'd hold the world still, if that would help. The door swung open and closed as techs passed in and out with blood products, instrument packs. Another armful of towels heated to a softness that felt like mercy. Layla hovered at the edge of the sterile field, eyes locked on Valor's face, fingers laced so tight her knuckles blanched. "He's bleeding less," Rowan said, "not to soothe, but to measure. I can feel good muscle underneath." He placed suction, irrigated, pressed. "Talk to him," he added, a gentle order that sounded like faith. Layla leaned in, voice low. "Hey, partner, it's us. You made it off that bridge. We're right here." Valor's ear flicked at the sound. The monitor tripped a hesitant uptick, then settled again, as if reminded what a heart ought to do. The doors eased open once more. Olivia stood in the threshold with her cane and a hand on the frame, listening first, orienting not to light, but to presence. The morning's damp clung to her hair. Grief and grit drew shadowed crescents beneath her eyes. Miss Green had driven her before sunrise. a silent sentinel on the ride over, and now slipped away to give the room to those for whom this was not a story but a life. Olivia crossed the tile by memory and by scent, the antiseptic tang, the faint copper of blood, the animal warmth she knew by heart. "May I?" she asked into the hum. Rowan looked up, softer than he'd been all night. "Come," he said, angling a stool to Valor's head. "Stay clear of the drape. He'll know you're here." Meredith made space without a word. Layla guided Olivia's hand until her palm found the wide, damp curve of Valor's cheek. The old shepherd's breath hitched. He leaned minutely into the touch. A tremor went through Olivia, then steadied itself into a rhythm older than fear. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's me. Do you remember the hallway lights in the old building? I didn't see them either, but you knew the ground. You knew the smoke. You knew where the door would be." Her words flowed without hurry, threading memory like beads. The first day she'd learned to trust a harness, the stubborn way he would shoulder her away from hazards. The summer afternoon, he stood like a wall between her and a bicyclist who never looked up. The winter night, when the fire turned air to knives, and he had pushed and pushed until there was only night air and sirens and the shock of living. "I was so angry after," she confessed, her voice as soft as fur. "At the world, at myself, at you, because I didn't want to be saved if the saving hurt so much. I asked for forgiveness in Braille, because I was too afraid to say it out loud." Heffinga slew along Valor's neck, searching for the battered collar. It had been sterilized, taped aside during triage, now set within reach like a relic. Rowan placed the collar in her hand, careful not to break the spell. Olivia traced the raised dots, each dot a truth that had outlived lies. "If anyone still believes in forgiveness, please bring me home." She read it aloud, the words entering the white noise hiss of the room, the rhythmic pulse of the IV pump, the small, human sounds of people choosing to stay. On the monitor, a green line gathered itself, lengthened a fraction. Valor's eyelids fluttered like moth wings against glass. He made a thin sound, deeper than a whine. A reminder that language is not only spoken. His paw, bandaged and clumsy, lifted an inch, wavered, and landed on Olivia's wrist, as if anchoring both of them to shore. Meredith's breath left her in a broken laugh that was mostly a sob. One nurse stepped back, covering her mouth with the back of her wrist. Another blinked hard and pretended an instrument tray needed polishing. Evan Rovan, who had built his life on separating the necessary from the merely felt, paused, with the forceps suspended, eyes bright, in a face used to calm. "Good boy," he said, and the praise steadied his hands. "Transfusion ready." The tech announced from the door, holding a unit, labeled with another donor dog's name, a quiet generosity that linked living beings into a single circulation. Rowan nodded. "Start it, please. Titrate, by pressure." He irrigated again, placed a line of sutures, laid a drain. The choreography began to slow, the frantic triage giving way to precision close. Check, cover, warm, monitor, wait. Olivia kept speaking, voice a warm thread binding the room. She told Valor about the children waiting at Valor home, about the three-legged puppy who followed him like a moon, about the festival where a blind boy had trusted a blind dog and learned that trust could be a compass. She did not hide the fire. "It still visits," she said simply, "in my chest, in my sleep. I think forgiveness is not forgetting. It is deciding to return anyway. If you come back to us, we'll keep going together. If you cannot, then let this touch be the last thing you have to carry." Valor exhaled, a long, shallow breath that seemed to clear ash from an old room. The monitor answered with a steadier rhythm. Meredith tucked a warmed towel along his flank, and Layla's shoulders loosened, as if someone had cut the wire that held them high. Minutes widened. Blood flowed. Heat returned where cold had settled. A tech dimmed one bank of lights. The room felt less like a battlefield and more like a chapel. Rowan checked, capillary refill, measured reflex, lifted the lid to see a pupil that, while blind, responded, like a body not done yet. "Has stabilizing," he said at last. A verdict issued by science and softened by love. Layla nodded so hard, her hair came loose. Meredith leaned her forehead to Valor's crown. Olivia's hand never left his face. And then it happened, in the smallest way, which is to say the true way. A single tear gathered at the corner of Valor's sightless eye, hesitated on the wet rim of fur, and slid into Olivia's palm, leaving a line the width of a prayer. She choked on the sound that rose in her throat. The nurses did not pretend not to hear. "I'm here," she whispered. I'm here. I'm here. Valor's paw pressed again, an ounce of pressure. Nothing. And everything. And the room took that ounce and made a harbor of it. Rowan adjusted the bandage one final time, taped the line, and stepped back. The urgency ebbed, replaced by that fragile quiet which always follows a life that has chosen to stay. Outside, the rain had thinned to a fine silver, the kind that makes streets smell clean. Inside, the numbers on the monitors formed their slow, imperfect lullaby. Layla brushed Valor's ear with the back of her fingers and looked around the room as if memorizing each face, each instrument, each proof that people can be brave in ordinary ways. Sometimes, hope survives in a single touch, even if it is only the last faint warmth. As Rowan wheeled the table toward recovery, word slipped past the doors and down the halls, then out into the waiting room, where strangers had begun to gather with coffee and quiet promises, and from there into phones and radios and the quick bright arteries of a city awake to itself. News of Valor's critical condition spread across the city, and the community began to call for justice for all canines second. The emergency room faded into a quieter place, where hours bled together in a slow, stubborn fight for life. News of Valor's condition swept through the city, drawing crowds to the clinic and flooding the halls with hope and prayers. In the days that followed, the world outside spun on, but within the recovery room, time became something else, measured not by clocks, but by each shallow breath, every small sign of strength. Valor hovered at the threshold between this world and whatever lay beyond, clinging to voices, to gentle hands, to the scent of those he loved. Rowan, Layla, Meredith, and Olivia took turns at his side, reading, whispering, soothing, waiting. It was nearly a week before Valor finally lifted his head and looked for the door. 6 days later, before dawn broke, the morning air in the hills was sharp and cold, heavy with the scent of dew and pine. Valor moved gingerly through the underbrush, his muscles still trembling from days spent fighting for life. Bandages wrapped his side, and the scars of fresh stitches traced new stories across his fur. Layla and Meredith walked close, ready to catch him if he faltered. Easy, boy, Layla whispered, her hand hovering at his shoulder. Valor's breathing was shallow, but his ears twitched with every distant sound, alert, alive, determined. Rowan had argued that Valor needed more time, but Meredith shook her head. Sometimes the only medicine is the fight itself. Olivia waited nearby, cane tapping softly, her voice a steady guide. Despite his wounds, Valor's nose worked the air with relentless purpose. He found the faintest traces, a boot print, a drop of oil, the unmistakable scent of fear. The others moved as quietly as possible, trusting Valor's instinct as he led them, not with strength, but with the stubbornness of a soul refusing to quit. And when danger closed in, when Marco's men circled and the trap snapped shut, it was not speed or power that saved them, but Valor's will to protect, to endure, and to lead his family home. Dawn had barely begun to break when the old truck screeched to a halt at the edge of the barren hills outside Ravenbrook. Frost glittered on wild grass. The sky streaked in bruised purples and gray. Breath steamed in the cold as Rowan, Layla, Meredith, and Valor tumbled from the cab, hearts pounding with exhaustion and terror. The trees beyond loomed dark and sheltering, but behind them, headlights slithered up the winding road, a reminder that the night's danger had not ended with the storm. Valor moved carefully, his wounded side bandaged, each breath a struggle. Yet his nose was high, catching every scent, every threat that the wind dared carry. Marco and his men were relentless, their pursuit driven not just by hatred, but by the desperation of men with everything to lose. Far off, Rowan could hear the snap of car doors, the low curse of voices hunting for them in the chill. This way, Meredith whispered, voice fierce, as she pushed through brittle brush. Layla steadied Valor, murmuring encouragement, her eyes darting to the pale light cresting the horizon. The group made for the shelter of the forest, branches clawing at their clothes and faces, Valor limping, but never wavering, ears flicking to the sound of pursuit. Behind them, the chaos sharpened. Marco's orders rang out, rage threading every word. The underbrush crackled as his men fanned out, boots churning mud. Meredith urged the others to stay low, leading them down a deer path, half hidden by frost. Trust Valor, she whispered. He knows the way out better than any of us. Layla pressed her palm to Valor's side, Feeling his ribs move under her hand, the shepherd paused, head cocked, then moved with new urgency, his nose twitching as he picked up a scent that turned his muscles rigid. Suddenly, Valor halted, body tense. He growled a deep, guttural warning, and Meredith's heart skipped. "What is it?" "Boy," Layla whispered. But Valor was already nudging them toward a small ravine veiled by brambles. "Go now," Rovan urged, adrenaline making his voice rough. They scrambled down the bank just as the shouts of Marco's men echoed behind them. A sharp crack split the air, the sound of a gun. Bullets snapped through branches overhead, showering the group with splinters. In the confusion, Marco's voice rose above the fray, cruel and familiar. "You can't run forever. You can't hide from me." But Valor, Afa wounded, moved like an arrow, doubling back through the thicket, scenting the very earth. He stopped abruptly, nostrils flaring. Layla felt him freeze, and in that moment, she realized he recognized the cadence of Marco's step, the way his boots landed on cold ground. Valor let out a low bark, then pulled hard to the left, leading the group away from an ambush Marco had set beyond the fallen trees. Rowan's pulse thundered in his ears as he realized how close they'd come to being trapped. They broke free into a clearing, gasping, mud splattered and shaking, but alive. For a heartbeat, everything was quiet, except for the ragged sound of breathing. Then, blue and red flashed between the pines. Sirens. A squad of heavily armed officers swept into the clearing, weapons raised. "Down police," they shouted, and for one wild moment, Rowan feared another betrayal. But then the special unit moved in, engaging Marco's men. Gunfire thundered, the woods erupting with chaos as law and order crashed together. Marco saw Layla and lunged, a knife gleaming in his hand. He caught her by the arm, spinning her around, the blade pressed tight to her throat. "Call them off," he snarled, his voice raw with panic. Layla's breath caught in her chest, paralyzed by fear and the press of steel against her skin. Rowan shouted, but it was Valor who moved body low, teeth bared in a desperate, final burst of courage. Despite blood seeping from his old wound, he leapt at Marco, knocking him back and away from Layla. The knife flashed, cutting into Valor's shoulder as he drove Marco to the ground. A shot cracked, echoing between trees. Marco screamed. Officers flooded in, pinning him and his men to the mud. Layla stumbled back, clutching her throat, tears streaming down her face as she watched Valor collapse at her feet. The shepherd's breathing was shallow, blood darkening the frost where he lay, but his eyes never left Layla, fierce with love, begging her not to give in to despair. Meredith dropped to her knees, pressing her hands to the wound, her own sobs breaking in the cold. All around, the officers cuffed Marco's crew, evidence bags filled with files and cell phones that would finally expose the network that had haunted Ravenbrook for years. Marco's face was pale with hate as they dragged him away, but Rowan's focus was on Valor, on the loyal heart that had risked everything for them all. Some wounds demand a price paid in survival, but light will find those who never give up. As paramedics rushed in, Rowan and Layla helped lift Valor onto a stretcher, hands slick with blood and hope, begging him to stay. Sirens wailed again as they sped through the thawing dawn. Every second, precious. Valor's future hanging by a thread. Their world narrowed to the rhythm of his breathing, the possibility that love and loyalty might just overcome even the deepest scars. The clinic lights were already on ahead, ready to fight for the life that had changed so many others. The sterile air of the veterinary operating room pulsed with a tension that no monitor could measure. The world beyond those four walls seemed to shrink until it was nothing but the collective breath of Rowan, Layla, Meredith, Olivia, and the team of nurses, all suspended in anxious hope. Dawn was fading, but no one noticed the time. Everything was focused on Valor. Sprawled on the surgical table, his chest rising and falling with agonizing effort, blood oozed from his shoulder. The bandages rapidly soaked, and every instrument gleamed under the harsh lights, ready to become a lifeline or a last resort. The city outside had become a silent witness, waiting for news with bated breath. Rowan worked with a rare intensity, sweat beading on his brow. His voice clipped as he issued commands to the team. "Clamp here, more suction. We're losing too much. Hang on, Valor." The nurses responded in a seamless choreography, their hands steady, even as fear shadowed their eyes. Meredith hovered at Valor's head, whispering to him in a low, trembling voice, her hand never leaving his fur. You've come back from worse. Old friend. Don't give up on us now. Layla stood just beyond the sterile field, her phone trembling in her grip, unable to remain silent or powerless any longer. She opened the camera and began to live stream, her face raw, tear-stained, filled with equal parts. Hope and grief filled the screen as thousands tuned in, comments flooding the feed from around the city and far beyond. Everyone, this is Valor, she began, her voice cracking. He's more than a K9. He's a survivor. He risked everything to save me, to save all of us. Right now, he's fighting for his life. If you care about justice, about loyalty, about second chances, send him your strength. Pray for him. Let the world know these dogs matter. Her words echoed through living rooms, phone screens, and radios across Ravenbrook. People who had never met Valor found themselves gripped by the urgency, drawn into the orbit of his struggle. Some gathered in the street outside the clinic, candles and hand-lettered signs transforming the curb into a sanctuary. Others sent messages from afar, their support pouring in faster than anyone could read. News crews assembled, capturing every moment for morning broadcasts, their cameras panning from the closed doors of the surgical suite to the growing crowd outside. Inside, Olivia waited at the window, clutching Valor's battered collar in her hands. She could feel the braille beneath her fingers, the message that had saved them both so many times. If anyone still believes in forgiveness, please, bring me home. She turned to the surgical table, her voice trembling but clear, as she placed the collar gently around Valor's neck. You're not alone, Valor. Not now. Not ever. Come back to us. The room stilled as she leaned close, reciting the inscription, letting the meaning fill the silence. Meredith and Rowan exchanged a look, one of those fleeting, silent acknowledgments that spoke of exhaustion, love, and the knowledge that hope, however fragile, was never wasted. Valor's breathing hitched, then steadied for a moment. Time seemed to stretch, as if the city's collective will was reaching through the glass, down the halls, and into that tiny pocket of light and effort. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Valor's eyelids fluttered. Lila gasped, the camera trembling as she leaned forward. He's awake. He's awake. The room erupted with cautious joy. The surgical team paused, their fatigue forgotten for an instant, as hope flared. Olivia pressed her hand to Valor's paw, tears streaming down her face, her whispered encouragement, too soft for the world to hear but strong enough for Valor to feel. Outside, the crowd began to sense a change. Word rippled through the masses, first a whisper, then a wave. He's alive. The dog made it. The vigil became a celebration and a prayer all at once. The media relayed Layla's live stream, amplifying the moment across the city. Reporters spoke in hushed tones about the meaning of Valor's fight, a symbol for justice denied and found, for love stronger than violence, for the possibility of healing, even in a broken world. Back in the surgical suite, Rowan removed his gloves, voice rough as he addressed the team. We're not out of the woods, but he's stabilized. He's got a fighting chance. Meredith crumpled in relief, sinking to a chair, as the weight of so many sleepless nights broke into tears. Olivia squeezed Valor's paw, the silver collar catching the morning light, and murmured her thanks to him, to the team, to every stranger waiting outside. Hope can be passed from one hand to another, through every quiet prayer, every gentle word, every act of courage. As Valor was moved to recovery, hooked to monitors, but out of immediate danger, Layla and the others stepped into the hall, through the windows. They watched the city gather, united for a cause bigger than any single animal, a movement of compassion and conviction rising from the shadow of violence. Valor had survived the impossible. Now, for the first time in weeks, the city exhaled together, as Rowan looked around at friends and strangers alike, faces shining with relief and tears. He understood the fight was far from over, but the tide had turned. Valor's recovery would be slow, uncertain, but with a city behind him, every step toward healing would carry more hope than the last. The City Hall auditorium pulsed with anxious anticipation, the marble floor echoing with hurried footsteps, camera shutters, and the low, persistent hum of a crowd too large for the seats provided. Reporters and residents jostled side by side, their faces tense with expectation and a hope too fragile to speak aloud. Bright television lights cast sharp shadows across the podium, where the fate of Ravenbrook, and perhaps justice itself, would soon be determined. At the front, Rowan stood beside Layla, Meredith, and Olivia. They wore exhaustion and resolve in equal measure, their bond, forged through sleepless nights and impossible choices. Valor, still recovering, rested at Rowan's feet beneath the table, a living emblem of loyalty, battered but unbowed. Every so often, Rowan reached down to touch the dog's fur, grounding himself in the silent strength that had brought them all to this day. Mayor Dorsey was led onto the stage in handcuffs, the spectacle, unmistakable, a powerful man, undone by secrets and the courage of those he once dismissed. The murmur of the room grew as the charges were read aloud: conspiracy, abuse of power, trafficking of retired canine, second, and complicity in violent crimes that had rocked the city to its core. Dorsey's face was a mask of pride, cracked by fear, his eyes darting to the cameras, to the angry faces in the crowd, to the police officers standing at attention, some of whom once called him friend. But it was the next arrival that shook the gathering. A hush fell as Ethan Vaughn entered, led gently by two nurses. The lines on his face were deeper, his hair streaked with gray, but his presence radiated a kind of battered dignity. The room's breath caught when Meredith rushed forward and embraced him, tears running down her cheeks. Ethan's gaze was distant, clouded by trauma and confusion, but as he took his wife's hand, something hopeful flickered behind his eyes. The doctors confirmed what everyone feared: his memory, damaged by years of abuse and isolation, might never fully return. But his life, so long thought lost, was proof that truth could outlast even the darkest lies. The press conference began, cameras flashing. Layla stood at the podium first, her voice trembling as she recounted Valor's ordeal, the betrayals, the violence, the moments when only hope and instinct kept them moving forward. The room hung on every word as she described the dog's courage, not just in saving her, but in surviving a world determined to break him. Rowan added his testimony, his anger at the system clear, but so was his conviction that healing was possible. Then Olivia approached the microphone. The city quieted for her, a survivor twice over, a voice emerging from the literal and metaphorical darkness. There are many ways to be blind, Olivia began, her voice carrying through the hall. But Valor taught me that courage doesn't come from seeing the path ahead, but from trusting those who walk beside us. She spoke of the fire, the loneliness that followed, the small, ordinary moments with Valor that made her believe she could survive. Her hands trembled as she held up his collar. Forgiveness is not forgetting, she said softly. It's believing we can be better, even when the world tries to convince us otherwise. Her speech cracked something open in the crowd. The auditorium erupted in applause, but not everyone cheered. Some police officers looked down in shame, others stepped forward, their voices breaking as they apologized for turning away, for failing the canine second and the people who fought for them. We let you down, one officer said, his words broadcast to the city. We forgot that justice means protecting every life, not just the ones we choose. Outside, news vans broadcast live every moment, social media feeds flooded with hashtags, messages of support and pleas for reform. Some in the city bristled at the criticism, angry at the implication that all law enforcement was broken. Others rallied behind Olivia, demanding new laws to protect service animals, to ensure no more were betrayed or sold for profit. In the wake of the press conference, something changed. Valor's name became a rallying cry. Children chalked messages of hope on the sidewalks. Volunteers poured in to help at shelters, and a wave of donations built momentum for real, lasting change. Rowan, Layla, Meredith, and Olivia watched from the steps as the city gathered in the square, strangers drawn together by a shared longing for redemption. Valor, resting in the shade, lifted his head at the sound of his name, tail thumping as if in quiet approval. Justice is not only a sentence handed down from a bench, but the scar that heals in a city's heart. As the crowd slowly dispersed and the city began to dream of something better, Rowan took Meredith's hand. The past, still heavy, but the future less uncertain. In the days to come, a new center for canine rescue and rehabilitation would rise, built not just in Valor's honor, but as a promise to every creature who had ever suffered in silence. With hope and resolve, the community looked ahead, ready to build on the foundation of pain, forgiveness, and unwavering loyalty. From this reckoning, something new would be born, the Valor Center, where no animal would be forgotten, and no act of courage would go unseen. The ribbon fluttered at the entrance of Valor Home, its bold letters shining in the morning sun. Valor Home, K9 Training and Rescue Center. The air was bright and clean, scented with dew and cut grass. But there was something else, a vibrant charge. The energy of dozens of people and dogs gathered for a new beginning, reporters clustered by the gate, their cameras poised to catch every second, while a crowd of neighbors, city officials, families, and police officers lined the path, their faces alight with anticipation all around the grounds. Children darted among the legs of working dogs, clutching homemade signs that read, "Thank you, Valor," and "Heroes have 4 paws too." Rowan stood at the edge of the gathering, one arm around Meredith, watching as Layla worked the crowd, smiling, shaking hands, handing out pamphlets for the new programs. The years of struggle and heartbreak had given way to something real, a foundation for change that would ripple out far beyond Ravenbrook. At his feet, Valor lay quietly, his graying muzzle pressed against Olivia's shoe. Even now, though his sight was gone, and his body still bore the scars of battle, Valor radiated a kind of gentle power, a quiet strength that stilled the crowd whenever he stirred. The ceremony began with a simple speech. Rowan stepped to the makeshift podium, his voice steady as he recounted the journey that had brought them here. He spoke of Valor once, an abandoned, battered shepherd left to die in the dark. Now, a symbol of resilience for an entire city. He talked of the cost of silence, the wounds left by betrayal, and the miracle of forgiveness. This place is for every dog who ever served and was forgotten, for every handler who ever grieved, and for every person who ever needed hope. Rowan declared, "Valor showed us the way. Today, we promise to walk that path together." Applause rose from the crowd. Meredith spoke next, her words quivering with gratitude and pride. "My family was torn apart by secrets and pain," she admitted, "but today, we stand together to heal, not just for ourselves, but for every soul who suffered in silence. This home will be a safe harbor, a place where brokenness becomes strength." She reached down to stroke Valor's fur, and the shepherd lifted his head, tail thumping softly in acknowledgement. The highlight of the morning was Layla's announcement. Taking the microphone, her eyes shone as she outlined the K9 to Guide Dog initiative. "Our goal is simple," she said, her voice carrying through the warm air, "to give retired canine a second chance, training them as guide dogs for the visually impaired. Valor taught us that courage isn't about what you see, it's about how you lead." The crowd murmured in approval, and several families with guide dogs pressed closer, eager to support the new venture. At that moment, Olivia approached the center of the gathering, her hand gently resting on Valor's head. "He saved me from darkness more than once," Olivia told the crowd, her voice thick with emotion. "Now, thanks to all of you, he will light the way for others. Every scar, every moment of loss, can become a source of light for the future." As if he understood, Valor rose to his feet, circling Olivia, before settling at her side, his muzzle pressed against her palm. The cameras flashed, but the moment belonged to the people and the dogs who had fought so hard for it. Children clustered around Valor, their hands tentative at first, then bold, as he wagged his tail in reassurance. Near the training yard, a small puppy with only 3 legs limped forward, tail wagging furiously. Valor, noticing the newcomer, lowered his head to nuzzle the pup, guiding him gently with his nose. The puppy gazed up, eyes wide with trust, and the crowd melted at the sight scars and imperfections transformed into courage and connection. The center itself buzzed with life. In one corner, retired, Canine Second worked with new handlers, practicing obedience and rescue drills. In another, volunteers learned animal first aid and the principles of justice for animals. Rooms once empty now rang with laughter and conversation, while outside, hopeful families visited the kennels, considering the dogs that might soon become their companions. Layla found herself drawn to the training field, heart full as she watched Valor lead the 3-legged puppy through his first exercises. The puppy stumbled, but Valor stayed beside him, patient and kind, demonstrating each movement until the younger dog managed it on his own. The lesson was clear to everyone. Watching leadership is not about dominance, but about support, encouragement, and trust. Layla felt something shift inside her, a determination that went beyond gratitude and became a calling. After the official ribbon cutting, the celebration became a festival. Food trucks arrived, filling the air with the smell of barbecue and coffee. Local musicians played on a makeshift stage, children danced with their dogs, and the media interviewed handlers, trainers, and guests about the meaning of the day. The Valor home was already living up to its promise, its mission echoing in every story, every connection made that morning. Later, as the festivities quieted and the crowd thinned, Layla walked the grounds, breathing in the scent of grass and the hope of a community transformed. She watched Valor no longer just a survivor, but a mentor and a friend to every creature in his care. His journey had changed her, and she knew it was time to take the next step. Inspired by Valor, by Olivia's resilience, and by the city's embrace of compassion, Layla decided to pursue advanced study in animal protection. She would become an advocate for every voiceless creature, ensuring that the spirit of valor lived on in every dog that passed through these gates. As dusk painted the sky with gold, the last of the guests lingered, unwilling to let the day end. Rovan, Meredith, Olivia, and Layla stood together on the porch, watching children chase each other between the kennels. Their laughter, a promise that things truly could change. Valor rested at Olivia's feet, his gaze soft but alert, as if taking in the peace he had helped create. The center glowed with light and music and gratitude. Every scar, every loss, had become a source of light. As the lights of Valor home flickered on and the city settled into night, those gathered understood the hardest journeys, when faced together, could transform pain into hope, and hope into a new beginning for all. Inspired by everything they had overcome, Layla felt certain their work was just beginning, and the future belonged to those willing to lead with courage, loyalty, and love. The K9 Memorial Park lay beneath a wide, open sky, the morning air filled with the gentle hush that belongs only to sacred ground. Rows of white stones, each etched with a name, a badge number, and a date, stretched across the green slope, telling silent stories of loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. The grass was trimmed with care, the garden beds bursting with spring color. Along the marble path, paw prints had been pressed into the cement, leading visitors from the iron gate to the heart of the memorial. There, a polished bronze statue of a shepherd stood watch, forever guarding the spirits of those who had gone before. On this day, the park was alive with people. The city had come to pay tribute, but beneath the solemnity was something new, a quiet longing for healing, for grace, for the kind of peace that can only come through forgiveness. Rowan stood to one side, his hands clasped and eyes moist with reflection. Layla and Olivia walked side by side, Valor pacing gently between them, his head occasionally brushing against Olivia's hand, as if to remind her he was still here, still fighting, still loving. Meredith and Ethan followed, their steps tentative but hopeful. Ethan's face, marked by the lines of suffering and redemption, showed the strain of memory slowly returning, and the tentative hope of restoration. The ceremony began with a moment of silence, the crowd bowing their heads as sunlight streamed through the leaves above. Then Olivia, dressed in a simple blue dress, moved forward with her mother. In her arms, she carried a wreath of wildflowers, each bloom picked from gardens tended by survivors and supporters of the K9 cause. Meredith joined her, the two women pausing together at the foot of the statue. Meredith's voice trembled, but did not break, as she addressed the gathering. We are here to remember those who served us, without question, who gave everything without ever asking for more than our love and protection in return. But we are also here to forgive not just the world, for the injustices it has wrought, but ourselves, for the mistakes we made, and even those who have wronged us. Today, we choose to let the past become soil for new growth, not a chain around our hearts. She laid the wreath at the statue's feet, her hands lingering, as if imparting one last message of love. The wind picked up, scattering petals across the lawn, each one a prayer, a wish, a fragment of memory. Olivia stepped forward then, her fingers tracing the names on the stones, her sightless eyes bright with unshed tears. She knelt beside Valor and took a small envelope from her pocket, running her fingers over the raised braille. This is my letter of thanks. For all the times you saved me, for all the days you never gave up on any of us, she whispered, voice breaking. Carefully, she slipped the letter onto Valor's collar, her touch gentle and reverent. Layla moved to stand with Olivia and Meredith, her own eyes shining as she looked out over the crowd. We are all survivors here, of loss, of grief, of injustice, but the greatest courage is not in surviving, but in forgiving. Valor taught us that true healing begins not when wounds are hidden, but when they are faced, accepted, and transformed. Ethan, his movements slow but purposeful, stepped up beside them. He turned to Valor, the dog's ears twitching in recognition of the familiar voice. For a long moment, Ethan knelt, tears falling freely as he placed a trembling hand on Valor's head. I owe you everything. Ethan said, his voice rough and full of regret. He made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I doubted the people who loved me. I gave in to fear. And I hurt those I swore to protect. I can't change the past, but I can ask for forgiveness. Thank you, Valor. Thank you for saving my family, for giving us a second chance. The moment broke something open in the crowd. A ripple of quiet sobs and gentle sighs passed through those gathered police officers, families, city leaders, survivors, each person finding their own reflection in the ceremony. Valor stood perfectly still, the letter pressing softly against his chest, his eyes turned toward Olivia, as if absorbing her words through the warmth of her hand. Then, Olivia reached for her mother's hand, drawing Meredith close. Together, they knelt before the memorial, their arms encircling Valor. Layla and Ethan joined them, and for a few minutes, the five formed a circle of gratitude and love, a living tribute to what had been lost and what had been found. The statue cast a long shadow across the grass, but in its shade grew something bright: forgiveness, acceptance, and a hope that could weather any storm. The ceremony continued as community leaders read names, shared stories, and spoke of the city's promise to honor every K9, every family, every person who had suffered. Balloons were released into the sky, each one tagged with a message of remembrance or forgiveness rising over the rooftops, disappearing into the blue. As the service ended, people lingered, exchanging embraces and memories, some pressing small mementos or photographs to the stones. Children traced paw prints in the cement, while elders told stories of dogs, long gone, but never forgotten. The crowd was united, not by grief, but by the shared act of healing, and the unspoken understanding that forgiveness is what makes both people and dogs whole again. Only when the sun was high did the group begin to drift away, but the feeling remained: peace, acceptance, a sense that the scars of the city had finally begun to close. As Olivia and Meredith prepared to leave, Olivia pressed a final kiss to Valor's head and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me how to see with my heart." Just as the quiet returned to the memorial, Rowan received a phone call. The city's mayor was on the line, his voice solemn. "Rowan, for your work, your courage and compassion in changing how we view justice and loyalty, you're being honored with the Ravenbrook Medal of Service." Rowan accepted. But as he looked back at his friends and the faithful dog who had inspired them all, he knew the greatest reward was not a medal, but the healing now blooming in every corner of their lives. Because only by forgiving can we ever hope to heal both human and dog, wounded in different ways, but saved by the same powerful light. As the sun bathed the stones in gold, the city of Ravenbrook moved forward, scarred, but stronger, held together by love, memory, and the courage to forgive. The morning sun glimmered on the green expanse of Ravenbrook Central Park, where a citywide celebration for rescue animals was unfolding in waves of laughter and applause. White tents dotted the lawns, each bustling with volunteers, veterinarians, animal advocates, and families. Booths offered everything from dog training demos to homemade treats, while balloons and banners rippled overhead, painting the sky with hope and unity. The scent of fresh grass mingled with grilling food, and a band played cheerful music in the distance, echoing above the chatter of hundreds who had gathered for a single purpose: to honor those who rescued, and those who had been rescued. At the heart of it all, Rowan stood beside Valor, the now legendary shepherd whose story had become a symbol of healing and resilience. The dog's fur glistened in the sunlight, and though his eyes saw nothing, his head was held high, his step sure as he waited at Rowan's side. Layla, vibrant and tireless, moved through the crowd with donation boxes, stopping to talk to children, share Valor's story, and encourage others to support the National Fund she'd founded to rescue canines second across the country. Olivia, her cane tapping gently over the path, walked with a small group of visually impaired children and their families, her laughter bright as she answered their questions about guide dogs, independence, and trust. The parade, long anticipated by the city, began with a hush of expectation as Rowan took the microphone at the head of the path. "Today, we walk together, not only for the animals we cherish, but for every act of courage, great and small, that brings us closer as a community," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. He nodded to Valor, whose tail thumped at the sound, and together, man and dog led the procession forward. Behind them trotted canine second, rescue mutts, therapy dogs, and puppies, all joined by their handlers and the families who loved them. But it was the next moment that lingered in every heart. A young boy, his hand resting lightly on Valor's harness, stepped forward from the crowd. The child's eyes were clouded by blindness, but his posture radiated trust. With a gentle word from Rowan, Valor guided the boy carefully across the crowded lawn, past, clapping, full in tears, and wide-eyed children. Through a sea of bright colors and swirling sounds, the boy's smile grew with each step, confidence blooming in his face, as Valor led him safely to the finish, their bond clear even to strangers. Cheers erupted, and several parents wept openly, overcome by the sight. Cameras flashed, reporters rushed to capture the story, and soon, images of Valor and the boy leading the parade spread across news stations and social media feeds. Those who had once doubted or feared Canine Second saw instead the compassion, patience, and unwavering loyalty that had carried Valor through a lifetime of darkness. Around the park, people began to approach Layla's booth, dropping bills and coins into the fund. Some shared their own stories of dogs who had saved them from loneliness, of rescues who had healed their families, of hope found in the least expected places. Rowan found himself surrounded by children, some climbing onto his shoulders, others asking to pet Valor, all eager to touch a living legend. Olivia offered hugs and encouragement to the visually impaired families, her story and Valor's echoing in every gentle word. Meredith and Ethan joined in, helping volunteers register new adopters and connecting with officers from other cities who wanted to bring the spirit of Valor home back to their communities. As the parade wound through the park, the atmosphere swelled with gratitude and laughter. Faces in the crowd brightened, each smile a testament to the lives Valor had touched. Some were those he'd rescued from danger, others simply inspired by his courage to begin again. The dog's head remained high, ears tuned to the voices of those who cheered him on, his tail waving like a banner of hope. At midday, Layla took the stage, thanking the community for their generosity and revealing that the fund had surpassed its goal in a single morning. She spoke of new beginnings, the responsibility to protect all working animals, and the importance of fighting for those who cannot speak. Valor is not just a hero, he's a teacher, she told the crowd. He shows us what it means to never give up, to trust, to forgive, and to move forward together. Rowan's eyes stung as he watched Valor gently nudge a nervous child who hesitated at the edge of the crowd. The dog's patience and quiet encouragement gave the boy courage, and soon the two disappeared into a circle of dancing children, all finding their place, led by a shepherd who had once lost everything and now gave so much. By afternoon, the park echoed with music and laughter, the city transformed by the energy of connection and renewal. The story of Valor, once an emblem of pain and injustice, had become a legend of unity, showing that sometimes a soul once lost in darkness could ignite hope for a whole generation. Sometimes a soul that has lost all its light can spark faith in an entire generation. As the festival drew to a close and the city celebrated together, a messenger arrived for Rowan. He had been invited to speak before the state legislature to advocate for laws protecting Canine Second and all service animals. The city's journey and Valor's legacy was far from over. With the crowd still cheering and Valor leading the way, Rowan knew their greatest work was just beginning. The rotunda's marble gleamed beneath a canopy of cameras and chandeliers, a stage set for a public reckoning and, if the city dared, a new covenant. Beyond the velvet ropes, the gallery overflowed, rescuers in rescue green tees, retired handlers in creased uniforms, families gripping hand-painted signs, and a discreet row of legislators' aides, whispering last-minute whip counts. Down on the floor, the clerk's voice carried through the chamber. Item 7B, the Valor Act, establishing standards of care, the retirement protection, and civil accountability for service animals, a houche fell, the kind that precedes verdicts and vows. Rowan sat in the front row with Layla, Olivia, Meredith, and Ethan. Beside Rowan, Valor rested on his elbows, head lifted toward the unseen bustle, ears tilting with each shift of the room. A soft leather vest plain, dignified, lay across the shepherd's shoulders, a small medallion pinned near the collar, a braille inscription that had once been a plea and had become a promise. Olivia's fingers found the medallion by touch, tracing the familiar dots as if reading strength into the metal. Meredith, fingers interlaced with Ethan's, leaned forward, her breath measured. Ethan's memory, still rain-spattered with gaps, had returned enough to hold this moment with both hands. Outside, A chorus of voices swelled along the Capitol steps. School children chanting Valor's name, volunteers from shelters across the state, and a cluster of officers who had come to say the thing institutions rarely say out loud: we were wrong, and now we choose better. News vans idled with antennae, raised like sentries, broadcasting every tremor inside, to a state that had learned, dog by dog, how tender justice could be. On the floor, testimone began. An opposition legislator cleared his throat and talked about costs, about unintended consequences, about the danger of elevating animals beyond their station. Layla closed her eyes, steadying the rush of anger. Then it was her turn. She rose, spine straight, voice even. She told them what it costs not to care the ER bills when abandoned canine second turned up half dead, the lawsuits when secrecy metastasized into abuse, the deeper price paid by children who learned that loyalty was disposable. She held up numbers fundraising totals from the national K-9 relief she'd built in Valor's name, waitlists of families ready to adopt, pledges from clinics, prepared to partner. Every figure was a door opening, every story, a face at the threshold. A committee chair cleared her throat. Dr. Roven. The bill envisions specific standards. Can you speak to their shape? He did. Now, with the rigor of a clinician and the stubbornness of a friend, lifetime medical coverage for retired canine, second funded by a dedicated state trust, independent sanctuary placement that bans the sale or transfer of any retired service animal for profit, on the record retirement protocols signed by commanding officers and veterinarians, trauma, informed retraining to help dogs transition into guide work, therapy, or life as a family companion, felony penalties for trafficking or abuse, whistleblower protections for handlers and shelter staff, a public registry of retirement outcomes so no dog disappears into paperwork again, and, for agencies, a requirement that deployment logs include body-worn footage whenever feasible, and a de-escalation standard that treats the dog as a partner, not a tool. He outlined funding streams, modest licensing fees, a slice of asset forfeiture redirected from vice to virtue, and matching grants from private philanthropy, already waiting in the wings. This isn't sentiment, he finished softly. It's stewardship. When Olivia stood, the microphones seemed to draw near of their own accord. She told them what it meant to cross a room you cannot see, led by a presence you can. She told them that forgiveness is not amnesia, but architecture, brick by brick, a way forward, where there had only been smoke. He walked me out of a fire, she said, resting a hand on Valor's shoulder. When I was afraid to live, he taught me how. The law you vote on today won't give him his sight back. It will give the next dog a future. It will teach our children what love looks like when it chooses duty. The clerk called for questions. There were a few about timelines and training reciprocity with neighboring states, about the grant application portal and oversight board composition. Meredith answered some, measured and lucid. The steel of a former K-9 officer, braided with the humility of a woman who had spent years learning to say, I'm sorry in the past tense, and we will in the future. Ethan, voice quiet but clear, said a thing. Only he could say I was lost, and the dogs survived me long enough to bring me home. Behind them, Valor's tail brushed the carpet like a metronome. The board lit for the vote. In the gallery, hands found hands. On the floor, a few lawmakers stared at the ceiling, the way people stare at church rafters when they ask for courage without needing anyone to hear. One red dot blinked to green, then a column slid toward yes, then another, then a cascade, then a landslide that rolled through the chamber like weather finally breaking. The Valor Act passes, the clerk announced, voice catching, despite itself. For a heartbeat, the room stood still, astonished at its own capacity. Then history remembered how to make sound. Applause rose in waves. Valor lifted his head, ears pivoting, the thunder of clapping folding around him like a warm coat. Layla pressed her forehead to his, laughing and crying all at once. Rowan exhaled, the sort of breath a man saves for miracles. Meredith pulled Ethan close, and for the first time since they had learned how fragile memory could be, they didn't fear what they might forget. They savored what they had become. A senator bent to scratch Valor's neck. A staffer wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and pretended it was dust. The governor stepped to a small desk at the dais and signed with a heavy pen, then another and another, passing them to the bill's sponsors, to Olivia, to Layla. Someone slipped the last pen into Rowan's pocket. He would find it months later and, before meetings, turn it in his fingers like a worry stone. A page approached with a simple ribbon deep blue, and Meredith tied it to Valor's vest, with fingers that had once looped leashes in grief, and now traced knots in gratitude. When the room finally quieted, Rowan asked for one more minute. He took the microphone and, as if narrating a benediction, said the line that had brought them this far. "Love needs no light. It only needs a heart that knows how to see." The chamber answered with silence, the kind that listens. Any darkness will pass when a heart wide enough to love stands in its path. In the glow of that small room, with applause still echoing in their bones, they understood that laws were only the floor. The ceiling would be raised each time a child learned to read by touch, a promise meant for a dog. Each time a department retired, a partner with honor. Each time, a frightened animal found a hand and decided the world could be trusted again. The legacy of valor would live not as marble or ink alone, but as 1,000 ordinary mercies, a leash clipped gently, a door opened, a life allowed to rest in peace or rise in purpose. Hope, forgiveness, and the stubborn strength to outlast every fire. These were the things the dog had carried through darkness. These were the things he left with them, glowing, like coals that would not go out. Valor's journey from an abandoned, blind shepherd to a living emblem of justice, who exposed corruption, reunited a broken family, and inspired the Valor Act, proves that loyalty and forgiveness can heal an entire city. Do these stories remind you of any place you've lived? Mention your hometown in the comments, and prepare for an ending that could break your heart and then heal it. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next.